Hi everyone, and welcome to our video on the need for cellular respiration. This is going to form the first of the video in our series about respiration in our organisms. And in this particular video, we're going to be having a look at specification reference 5.2.2a, the need for cellular respiration, including the key examples there of why plants, animals, and microorganisms need to respire. Let's start off with one of the basics that hopefully you remember from all the way back down in Key Stage 3, where you were first introduced to this concept of a process called respiration. Now, respiration is one of these processes that occurs in all living cells. And hopefully we remember that as an end result of this respiration, we're going to be able to get energy in the form of ATP, which is going to then allow us to drive these other biochemical processes within the organism. So the way that we do that is obviously we take in various organic molecules such as glucose, and then we need to release that stored energy from that glucose molecule, and that's then used to generate our ATP, and that's going to be built up from ADP and an inorganic phosphate combining. When it comes to the time that we then need energy for a particular process within a cell, then we will hydrolyze our ATP in order to release that energy. And remember, when we're talking about hydrolyzing, then this is just a hydrolysis reaction, and hydrolysis reactions are always to do with breaking things down. So when we're thinking about where this stored energy is going to enter an organism, it comes from the organic molecules that are part of diet. So what we find here is, as part of your diet, you'll be taking in various foods. Those foods will be made of carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, etc. And these are those key biological molecules we looked at back in module 2. So obviously what we can see here is that when we've got our paper 1 or paper 3, where we do have that content that spans modules 2 and 5, for example, we could get questions that are primarily based on respiration, but part of the question drops back into our biological molecules. So we could be asked further detail about those. And one thing I always recommend that my students do is that when you're going through, particularly the year 13 content, so those module 5 and 6 bits, it's make sure that you're picking out any of these potential links. So if we're looking at a concept where we are talking about a biological molecule, that could be part of a question that goes into this on the paper. So make that link in your own mind, revise that topic alongside this, because it all helps when you go into that exam hall. The more of those interconnections you formed yourself in your mind before the exam, the easier it's going to be to actually do it when you're reading those questions. So what we have in our diet: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins. Now that's going to provide that stored energy for us to actually utilize in this process of respiration. And the reason we then need to generate this ATP, which we can then use for other metabolic processes, is because we've actually got a whole range of different processes within organisms that have an energy requirement. Things like active transport, again, something we looked at back in module 2. Endo and exocytosis, the synthesis of different molecules like our DNA and our proteins. So what we can see here is there's various links that we can pull out and therefore make those connections with. Now, when we talk about metabolic reactions, then these are the reactions that are taking place inside all of these living cells. And we can divide them up into two categories. We have anabolic reactions, where we're going to be synthesizing larger molecules from smaller ones. And then we've got catabolic reactions, where we're going to hydrolyze those large molecules and break them down into the smaller ones. Now, there is a little way to help you remember these. These are hopefully not completely new words to you. You may well have heard this word anabolic before, and you may have heard about anabolic in the term of anabolic steroids. Now, if we think about anabolic steroids, these are obviously used in sort of various athletes, etc., to increase things like their muscle mass. So what they're actually doing there is they're building muscle. So when we see anabolic, we can link it to anabolic steroids, building things. So we're just going to be building these larger molecules from the smaller ones. And catabolic is just the opposite. We're going to break the large molecules down into the smaller ones. So what we've done is we've mentioned this substance ATP. Now ATP is a chemical that we first met back in module 2. So we looked at how it's obviously formed. We had a look at the difference between ATP, ADP, AMP. And obviously what we're looking at is a chemical molecule. And the reason that we're going to be generating this ATP is because it's a substance we can easily move from one place to another in a cell. And obviously if we're making this in one particular region that respiration occurs in, we may need it in a completely separate part of the cell. So we've got to be using something that is easily transportable, and that's ATP. When we actually have that requirement for energy to drive a process, then we're going to have this hydrolysis reaction take place through the action of an enzyme, and that's going to lead to the energy from that ATP being released so that it can be used for whatever metabolic reaction we require. So if you think about ATP as a way of transferring that original energy that was in our organic molecules as part of our diet to something that we can move around the cell easily to then drive other processes that have an energy requirement, you kind of got to grips with what ATP is. If you think back to module 2 where we looked at biological molecules, then I spent a lot of time in my videos mentioning these two reactions, condensation and hydrolysis. And if you remember, what I told you was that if we're talking about joining things together, it's condensation. If we're talking about breaking things up, it's hydrolysis. It worked with our carbohydrates, lipids, proteins. It also works with ATP. So what we're going to see here, we've got a condensation reaction where we're going to start with ADP, the adenosine diphosphate, and an inorganic phosphate molecule. Those are going to combine together in this condensation reaction to make ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Then when we want to break down the ATP, what we use is a hydrolysis reaction, and that means we're going to be forming the ADP and the inorganic phosphate once more. When we're carrying out that hydrolysis reaction of ATP, then a proportion of energy is going to be lost as heat. Now, that's obviously being released from the chemical molecule of ATP into the cell surroundings, basically. And what we can actually find is it's not just wasted. As much as we always like to think that anytime we're generating heat, that's wasted heat, GCSEs were terrible for teaching you such things, then what we actually find is, in the context of a living organism, this small amount of heat that we are generating as ATP is hydrolyzed can actually be used to help keep organisms warm. And if we're maintaining a certain degree of temperature within the body, that means we're maintaining a particular temperature, which is important when it comes to enzymes. And hopefully we've worked out by now that when we're talking about living organisms, enzymes are responsible for huge numbers of reactions. Therefore, keeping those enzymes at their optimum temperature is going to benefit the overall organism as well. As always, I hope you found this video useful, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can see when the next video is updated. And of course, head on over to the A-Level Biology website where you can find a range of other resources to support you in your A-Level biology studies.